Good morning. And calling the Texas State Board of Examiners of Psychologists into session. It is 10 a.m. on August 18th. Go ahead and call the roll. Mr. Adler, not here. Dr. Becker,
Present.
Belamowitz is here. Mr. Bridges,
Here.
Dr. Calhoun,
Here.
Dr. Cartwright is not here. Dr. Lambden,
Present.
Dr. Singh. So we just barely have quorum. So minimum is present. We're going to stand at ease for just a second. I have called us into session without our board coordinator here. We'll stand at ease for just a minute.
They were letting me know the videos just started up too, so yeah, I think let's wait for that.
Yeah.
If we can.
Very good.
And also, I think remember the mic button.
Yeah, I'm good. Correct. You can. Yeah. Only make that mistake once.
I just checked to see. I didn't see her on there. We can if that's what you want to do, but we can go look for it one more time. I guess.
Okay, so we're back. Again, thank you to the members of the public for being here. Appreciate you guys. Today, I don't have a whole lot to talk about on the chair's report other than we're going to get into some rules that were really the brainchildren of our last meeting, and I'm looking forward to discussing those and seeing what we can do with those. With that, I'll turn it over to our board administrator, Diane Moore.
Mr. Chair, did you want to do number 2, which was public comment?
Oh, I'm sorry. I've scrolled up past that. Thank you very much. Let's start with public comment, and we can start with Ashley Arnold.
All right. My name is Ashley Arnold. Today I'm submitting public comment as an individual. I am in support of the proposed changes for 463.9. Even with the language in D3, the applicant still has to meet subsection E of that rule, which specifically lists out the graduate coursework that an applicant must have regardless of what their degree in psychology or a related field requires. I don't see a negative impact for this rule. I have faith in 99% of our training programs to ensure the student is competent and ready to provide services. I don't feel that universities would just accept anyone, as they don't want to put up with poor performing students either. So even if, say, an LPC or a social worker had an ethics and assessment class, it likely doesn't meet the requirements for school psychology, ethics and law and assessment, and thus they would have to take those classes as a minimum. Regarding the proposed changes for Rule 463.8, I am not in favor of this rule as it is currently written. I do not feel that an LPA would receive adequate supervision by someone who holds only the Lssp license, as that would indicate the supervisor's practice has only been in the school setting, which is not the intent of the LPA license. Instead, I suggest that the rule be amended to say a duly licensed LSSP/LPA to supervise an LPA. It doesn't make sense to me that a person that would supervise someone wouldn't possess that same license that the supervisee is seeking or would practice under. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Dr. Grothues?
Thank you, Chair Blamowitz. My name is Dr. Carol Grothues. I am a licensed psychologist and chair of the TPA TSBEP Monitoring Committee, and I'm here to make public comments on the proposed rules. We appreciate the board's attempt to address outdated and unnecessary rules while also seeking to address workforce shortage areas. I will be speaking on proposed changes for 463.11, 463.35, and 463.8, although that Ms. Arnold had great recommendations regarding 463.8. Under 463.11, supervised experience, we agree with the addition of the accreditation by PCSAS. It does continue to support high standards of training. While it's not clear why there needs to be a deletion of gap year limits, this may not be a major issue. I think that was the reason that it's just not very common, but I hope that the board considers to monitor that issue because I do think delays do affect competency. We have great concerns about the inclusion of Section E, which essentially allows psychologist applicants to avoid and circumvent the formal internship experience. Removing the requirement of additional full-time intern and minimum of 2 supervisors sets up a preceptorship and not an internship. It is not a misnomer. It is a significantly different experience and removes the formal nature of this critical training period.
I'm sorry, can you tell me what section of which you said?
Section E
Of 11? 463.11?
of 463.11.
You said the addition of that one?
Yes. It basically allows for interns in a HPSA HPSA area to not have to meet the 2 supervisor, 2 intern requirements. While the underlying intention of working to increase the number of mental health providers is appreciated, diluting national training standards in this attempt is not the answer. The board has already taken steps to increase mental health providers, most notably with PsyPACT and the changes to LPA to independent providers. Both of these changes are significant, but will take some time to have demonstrable effects. Eliminating training criteria has potentially catastrophic consequences. It either conveys the message that individuals in shortage areas do not deserve to have appropriately trained providers, or that the internship requirement that has been established as minimum training criteria is not necessary. How can you regulate a profession with such conflicting regulations? How can it be required in one paragraph and not in another? It is our understanding that we have already come to an agreement about remediation of deficiencies in training, and this paragraph is not a remediation, but an exemption. This issue also affects the professional development proposal options, Rule 463.35. While we again appreciate the intention of trying to address the shortage areas, if the board decides that PD is optional for those individuals, then why have it? Why require it? And once again, are we unintentionally communicating that we are okay with allowing substandard providers to deliver services because it's better than nothing? We need to do better than that. We believe it's possible to consider that a supervisor could receive PD credit because of the increased responsibility of supervision, but the monitoring of such activity seems to be quite difficult. How many people need to be supervised and for how long? And some PD may be acceptable. We don't want the majority of hours to be allowed as credit. Finally, on the proposed rule change of 463.8, the LPA, the inclusion of LSSPs was confusing to us. I'm not really sure why that needs to be a provider for practicum experience. And in general, we do appreciate the attempt to address the workforce issues, but we just continue to fight against lowering standards or ignoring standards that we think are critical to ensuring the adequate provision of services to Texans. Thank you.
On that last one, on 463.8, can you
Yes.
just come back and
Yes.
again, what part of that?
It included that supervision by an LSSP could count for practicum experience. And I'm in complete agreement with Ms. Arnold that said it needs to at least be an LSSP LPA. And even that is, questionable. We'd rather have an LP as the primary supervisor.
But that's the main problem.
Yes.
Okay.
We don't understand why that was included.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, thank you to the members of the public for being here and providing comment and color for where you guys are on that. Now with that, I'll turn it over to our board administrator for board administrator's report.
Hello, everyone. Just to let everyone know that the council, we did move to our new location at the new George H.W. Bush building, which is located at 1801 Congress Avenue. We're in Suite 7.300 in Austin, Texas. Our performance reports are in our meeting packet. Did anyone have any questions on that? It's pretty standard reporting. I moved to SIPAC. SIPAC indicated that they were getting a lot of letters and inquiries from the American service pets to verify emotional support letters. So they issued a statement that is on their website. And when the SIPAC looked at that, the ASP website claims that a licensed psychologist review a questionnaire that is prepared by the individual applicant. The questionnaire does not indicate that any telepsychology services were provided at any point prior to the issuance of the ESA letter. Absence of any provision of telepsychology services, the psychologists purportedly signed these letters are not practicing interjurisdictional telepsychology, and therefore the SIPAC privilege is not applicable to the issuance of these letters. And then they further instructed individuals that were seeking to verify a license status of individuals who are licensed psychologists should check with the regulatory body where the psychologist is licensed. We'll move on to ASPPB report. The ASPPB in-focus licensure data for 2021 has been published on the ASPPB site for the Center for Data and Analysis on Psychology Licensure. The data collected on the site is very useful for regulatory boards to see other jurisdictions' data requirements for licensure. The upcoming annual conference for ASPPB will be held on October 26th through the 30th of 2022 in National Harbor, Maryland. The board here will need to designate a voting delegate to attend this meeting. And to my understanding, our board chair, John Belamowicz, has volunteered to serve on the panel and to serve in that role for us. And also Daryl Spinks volunteered to attend this meeting. So we would need a vote for them to attend the conference on behalf of our agency.
So Ms. Moore sent out an email on that, and there were no volunteers, so I kind of stepped up. So I would need a motion to actually send me, unless somebody else wants to do that.
This is the one that's in November, right?
It's in October.
October.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second it.
it's been moved and seconded to send me and Daryl to ASBPP in October. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. Thank you very much. Appreciate you.
I have one more item. The new practice exam for the school psychologist that is administered through the Educational Testing Service has issued a new exam that will begin September 1st of 2022. The passing score for this exam is 155. The prior exam's passing score was 147. The new exam will be in alignment with the new NAFS 2020 professional standards. And for more information on this new exam, you can visit the ETS website. And that concludes my report.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Moore. Patrick, are you going to do our dismissals and whatnot?
Sure, I can run through it.
Very good.
Did you have a question?
No, sorry.
Yeah. If you look in the packet.
Is your mic on?
5A.
Is your mic on?
Oh, sorry. You'll see there's 29 cases listed there that were dismissed in the third quarter with the general reasons and for the dismissals. And that's, they've already been dismissed, but they're for your review. If you have any questions, you can certainly ask now, or you can reach out later as well.
Very good. Any questions? Okay.
The next report in 5A II, you'll see that's the third quarter status report. So this is a report for the entire agency-wide, but you will see that TSBEP is listed in here. It's a breakout, and so there are 73 complaints currently pending as of May 31st. And quite frankly, that's really low. It's usually hovered around like 100, maybe 110, 120 previously. And so I don't know. I think that shows a lot of efficiency in that the numbers are getting lower. So there's also breakouts of some of the other types of priority cases in there as well. Thankfully, we don't have too many of those. But again, sexual misconduct is one of those that we watch and monitor, and that's something that does show up on that report. And then that's pretty much for the report. A lot of this is agency-wide. That I can tell you that if you look down I don't know exactly for psychology, but I do know that I don't think there's a case older than 2020 on there. Whilst there are cases here, there's 1 in 15 and 16. 3 and 16. Those are some of the other boards, but those are being weeded down significantly. And so when they came over, there were cases as old as 2009. So thankfully, it's all getting slowly but surely taken care of. So we're definitely pushing to try to get nothing is old, everything prior to 2020. Like there's a hard push to get that out the door and over with. But thankfully for you guys, none of those are your cases. So.
Great.
But that's pretty much it for that report, unless there's any questions on that.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
I was just wondering, and it depends on what the intent is, the goal, but just looking at this report for me, I know it would have been good, and I don't know how difficult it would be to do this in terms of the data analysis, but it would be helpful, at least for me, to be able to look at just the numbers, at the proportions, if you will. In terms of the licenses that are out there for each of those, for example, licenses as an independent psychologist, on some of these reports. I don't know if, that would be something you might want to do or be able to do.
Like a breakout of the data?
So, for example, if you have sexual misconduct, it would be helpful for me to be able to see there's, in reference to this number of licenses that are issued, this is this proportion or this percentage for MFTs the same, because the numbers vary so much,
Right.
it's difficult to kind of look at them and draw any sort of meaning without a reference point.
We don't have it broken out if it's like an LPA, LP, LSSP, or as in the LP, like the LPC board, like if it's an LPCA, at LPCS, or we don't have that. I'm kind of speaking for Alfonso because he's the one who creates this report. I don't know if it's possible to do that, but I can certainly ask him about it. I will say that there's one of the reasons why you see the numbers are disproportionately larger for like LPC and social worker is because their licensing base is about 30,000.
That's why I say that,
Yeah.
excuse me, because it would be helpful for us when you standardize it a little bit and put it in terms of a reference point. It's helpful to see, and that's helpful to us as well, as a governing board to be able to see, are we doing a good job in terms of training? Do we have a handle on this, especially some of these, ethical issues? Do we require more? Should we look at whether more ethical training is needed?
Yeah. So it's essentially a breakout of the license types. Is that what you're talking about? I know in the past with the psychology board, there used to be presentations that we would give that would have a little bit more breakout of the data, and there might be a way to do it specifically for psychology. The one thing about this is this report is really all boards and the council, so it's something that's used for each of them. So it's really sort of like what this board typically looks at is the TSB-EP section, and so whether or not LPC maybe needs to their proportions are different. That's kind of like an LPC board problem that the council and the LPC board can look at. So my point in saying that is I don't know how much that data is going to help this board for MFT and LPC and those sorts.
Oh, no, that wouldn't be the intent.
Okay.
The intent is for each of those agencies to obtain information to be able to make informed decisions for each of the licenses that they govern.
I see what you're saying. I mean, it's definitely something that I think I can see if that's something that we can create based on our database that this is used from. I just don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. So,
Okay.
So if I'm understanding correctly, though, we have 4 very different license types within our purview. So if I'm understanding this correctly, you're asking for a breakdown of LPs, LPAs, LSSPs, and provisional LPs that are in that, because those have very different licensure requirements, is what I hear you saying, right?
Yes, as well as MFTs, as well as some, I mean, I imagine as long as you're doing the data analysis for us, it would make sense, and I don't know, maybe an inquiry could be made about whether or not they would benefit from those numbers to be able to, make informed decisions. But at least, I think for us, I know for myself, and I don't know how the rest of us feel, but I think that would be helpful to us when we look at these numbers, to be able to say, the way it is now, it's a little bit like comparing apples and oranges, because, what is a 5 for us and a 5 for LPCs, it's very different in terms of the proportion of licenses that are out there.
okay. I think to better answer your question, I think I'd have to go back, speak with the enforcement manager, Alfonso, and see if this is even something that is a report that we could pull that data. Because the difficult part is, I think it would be too difficult to do if we had to manually go back through each and every single case. So a lot of this is stuff that's through our database that we were able to pull that information, because we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of cases to go through. So.
Right, or maybe even starting from this point onward, right?
Yeah, I mean, we can come back and try to discuss it, but I don't know if it's really honestly don't know if it's a possibility. That's why it may just be the database doesn't let us do that. So.
Yes, I see. I just thought I'd, just see if anybody would be interested in those numbers, and if they were, if they could be done.
On that, okay. It would probably have to be a different. It'd probably have to be a different report. Yeah, I don't. Daryl's sending me a note. He's saying he doesn't think that that's really a report that we would be able to generate actually is basically what he's already telling me right now. So
Okay.
I think the
that's
answer to that
fair.
question is, yeah, I don't think that's a
Yeah.
possibility, unfortunately.
I think
Okay.
when you talk to a bunch of psychologists about statistics, and we brought this up about some other topics, it's just that statistics are interpretable in different ways, and the numbers, when you compare numbers like we do,
Yeah.
they don't mean the same thing comparatively when you have groups that are not equivalent, and when you have different groups mixed in, we're not comparing apples and oranges. And as long as we understand that and we interpret it that way,
Yeah.
I think we just have to understand that we are interpreting a mixed group to a large group that is all the same. And so that's, I mean, it's just that our enforcement data is not comparing apples and oranges, and we can just move on from there.
Yeah.
It's a mixed fruit bowl.
It's okay.
Okay, I'm sorry. We're on status reports, or are we on discussion on ISCs next?
Unless there's any more questions on status reports.
Any questions?
No?
Hearing none.
I think there's June 1st through August 31st of 2023 that's open.
I think I'm up for the psychologist.
Looks like that's correct. Patrick, are you taking this down?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Need a public member. I'm doing the one before.
I can do public.
Okay. Mr. Bridges stepped up. And I say we draft Indoni, Mr. Zaguris. He can, if he's not okay with that, we can reschedule him. So without objection, those three are down. All right. Agenda.
And there's nothing for a IV.
No dismissals.
No, no dismissals for board ratification, no.
Okay, very good. Let's go back to agreed orders.
There's one agreed order. It was voted on last board meeting, but since it fell in that quarter, that's why it's included in the packet.
Oh, we were already done with
It's already been executed. It was voted on last meeting.
And no, hang on, SOA. Nothing at SOA.
Nope.
To go over. All right. Let's go to 6. Nothing on 6A. We've got a compliance report for 6B. And there's nothing, no action needed there, correct? Correct. Anybody have any questions on that? All right, moving on. All right, now we're into rulemaking. All of these rules are proposed, and so we can start with 463.8, which we received some public comment on. You guys will bear with me. Let me get it up on my screen here. All right, the floor is open for discussion on 463.8.
Mr. Chair, do you want me to go through why those?
Yeah, run it out for us.
Brief run through
Yeah.
what's there, why it's there. Based on the last meeting that we had about that we had actually in this room, staff went back and tried to put together some suggested changes for your consideration based on what was discussed at that meeting. So so starting with 463.8, the last two subsections, those are already approved and those are going to the council next week. So those aren't necessarily here for discussion.
Say that again.
So in 463.8, we have H and G. Those were already approved in a prior meeting, so we don't really need to look at those unless you really want to discuss them. So I'm going to spend my time talking about some of the other subsections. And so starting in A2, where it talks about the 6 semester credit hours, this is under the supervision of a licensed psychologist. The or an LSSP was added because there was discussion about the possibility of seeing what sort of bridge or pathway a current LSSP we could make for them to become licensed as an LPA, And so one of the things staff identified is one of the big hangups is an LSSP definitely has more than 6 semester credit hours of supervised experience. The problem is under their rules, they're only really required to have that supervision done under the supervision of an LSSP, and sometimes it's under an LP, but it's not always. It's usually under an LSSP. So this was one of the big hangups, that if we've looked at their education and said, well, they do have more than 6 semester credit hours of supervised experience, would we want to count that as if it's only supervised under an LSSP? So that's why that language was there, and that's obviously up for your guys' discussion and debate. A3 was just a typo correction, and that was discussed at the previous meeting, so that's not really necessarily something that we need to get into. But 4 was sort of under A4, that was sort of a discussion point in. We have all of these coursework listed out that's required for the degree, and the LSSP rule matches up very closely with the LPA licensing education requirements, except for in 4C, applied psychology. There may be a course that might be able to somewhat shoehorn into that from the LSSP rule, but it's not almost a straight, obvious connection that, like, the other ones are all almost the same title. It's very obvious that they almost are sort of modeled very similarly, except for 4C. So that was just something worth pointing out. Then going on down to B2 or B3, that's a typo correction that we discussed previously, and then going down to what is in C5, it says applicants licensed as a specialist in school psychology, and then we added or as a provisionally licensed psychologist may utilize experience acquired under that license. That was the issue that we talked about at the previous meeting, where we have seen some people be able to achieve a provisional license as a psychologist, but not actually be able to become a licensed psychologist. And this would allow those people to come back, get an LPA, and then use that previous supervised experience that they had gained as under their provisional license to then gain independent practice status as an LPA. So that's why that's listed in there. And then D, we recommended striking all of that, which is the gap provision. That was where we had discussed previously under the LP licensing rule. There's the issues with the gap rule, and we can talk about that rule later. But if that's deleted, then D definitely needs to be deleted, because it would be referencing a rule that we got rid of. And I can go into the gap rule, but I figured maybe we might want to save that till we get to the 463.11. I don't know. That's pretty much it for what we have for the LPA rule. But of course, if there's any questions, I can try to answer those.
I think the only comment I'd make on the gap rule is we tend to always grant waivers, and it's like, why is this?
I've never seen anybody get denied for it. Even when they come up under the gap rule, they always ask for it. The gap rule basically has listed exceptions in it where staff can grant it, and if it's not a listed exception, it always has to come to the board. And every single time it's come to the board where there's a gap issue, they've always been granted. So it's almost, there seems to be no point to it, I guess.
If we're not actually,
It's never been used.
Yeah.
That I've been with the board for 5 years, and Daryl's been for a decade, and he's never seen it. So.
Yeah. Okay, so it sounds like the main concern here is on 463A subsection 2, allowing him to be supervised by an LSSP.
So I'm hearing what our public commenters are saying, which is it's not just the umbrella of broad LSSPs, but an LSSP that is duly licensed as an LPA, so that there is some cross-understanding of what an LPA is, and that supervision is within the degree that that person is seeking, and that is sort of that dual point. I don't know how anybody else on this board feels right now. I feel a little bit uncomfortable making a rule without any LPAs present on the board. I hate to be inefficient, but I don't know if we should be tabling this till at least Mr. Adler or Mr. Zaguri is here to comment on this. I just feel a little uncomfortable doing this without either of them here.
That's fair, and I've thought about that. Keep in mind, this is only proposing it, so
Yeah.
we still get another bite at the apple of editing this. To me, it seems clear that it doesn't seem like a heavy lift to add to this, duly licensed, and we could make that amendment today and still propose it and still talk about it again.
Yeah.
And if we hate it next meeting, we can vote it down next meeting, or if it passes muster, we can proceed. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to add, I think there are, and this is anecdotally speaking, I don't know the data off this, but it's far more common for there to be an LP and an LSSP duly licensed. I'm not aware of any LPA, LSSP duly licensed. So I'm just saying if we add LPA to it, I don't know that that's actually going to
Do anything.
do anything. I've not seen any I've not ever seen any that I'm aware of. There may be some. I've never seen it before.
Or they're not practicing under the both, together. Or,
Well,
they may be there, but they're only practicing under one or the other lessons.
Sorry, and Dr. Singh, make sure you turn on your microphone.
So people are watching. If you hit the little button right there, they can. Yeah, that one. Then they can hear. They can maybe hear you a little bit better.
They may not be practicing under both licenses, So they may have had LPA, didn't do very well for them, then they went and got LSSP, and they don't use LPA.
There might be. I'm not aware of any. I haven't ever seen that.
I think I know one.
You know one?
One of our former student.
Again, I'm super naive to this, which is why I'm saying I don't know enough about this to have a real strong opinion about this. I am simply going based off the public comment to say I hear, to me, what they are saying from a public perspective makes a lot of sense to me. And I'm not hearing the counter argument. So I just don't know enough about it to have a real strong opinion. So without having our board members who live it, I just don't know enough about it to have an opinion.
Yeah, Daryl just reminded me that Andoni is actually an LPA and an LSSP. So there's the one. But the other thing though is that LPAs don't really get supervision training like an LP. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to see how adding that license type and requiring that license type if they're not actually ever, because they're not ever previously supervising, what that does, I don't know that it, again, I just don't think it helps. I think it makes it more difficult, so.
And LPA is on the extinction route because they're not hardly anybody going anymore at least our school for that licensure. And they're going for LPC instead, or they're going for LP or LSSP or LMFT. The other LPA doesn't get them anything very much to any great incentive for them to go that route. So already if you see the numbers, they have diminished quite a bit.
Yeah, and Daryl's just chimed in to say that they still will require, one of the things that'll make it difficult for LSSPs trying to become an LPA is they're still going to have to pass the EPPP at the doctoral level, and then they still have to get 3,000 hours of supervision under an LP before they can get independent practice. So, that's just to consider.
Practically speaking, so obviously this needs some tweaking before it's ready for final passage and sending up to BHEC. As a practical matter of keeping the ball rolling on this and not losing a board meeting over it, is this My question is in terms of if we proposed this with the full knowledge that it's not ready for prime time, so that we can have another bite at it at the next meeting, how far can we take it before like it becomes substantial enough that it would be deemed to be essentially be reproposed? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's really difficult without having a crystal ball to know what changes we're going to make.
Right.
But
imagine the changes we're talking about here,
Yeah.
tweaking and threading the needle of who's going to do supervision and how. Is that a
Right.
substantial enough change that we can do it then and talk about it and think about it between now and then?
So the Attorney General has a manual about proposals and rule proposals and adopting with changes. And the general standard under a lot of the case law is if the amendments you make to a proposed rule when you adopt it, it's assumed that there should be changes because you're going to receive public comments.
Right.
But if the rule would in effect be a new or a completely different rule, and if it basically becomes more stringent, those are some of the standards they'll look at and say you should just re-propose. Because if we're basically saying, like, let's just say we propose this where it says or an LSSP under supervision, and then we said no, we want an LSSP and a duly licensed LSSP and LPA. That would be something that would be more stringent, that would have to be re-proposed because it's making it more difficult. It's not if we relax the standard, if we did it less like stringent, that would be something where we wouldn't necessarily have to re-propose. But
So if we were to change it to the duly licensed, if we propose to change it to the duly licensed here, we allow for public comment before the next meeting, we could then change it back at the next meeting.
We can lower the bar.
We could lower the bar at the
said-
next meeting and pass it then, is what I'm hearing you say.
As long as it's not too substantial of a change by lowering the bar, essentially, or changing it. So
Basically, what I'm saying is if we change it now and make it more stringent, we could change it back without an issue, but we couldn't make it harder without receiving the public comment on it. Is that what you
Yeah,
heard?
I'm just
Okay.
what I'm trying to do
I'm
is
just trying. It's really hard without
Yeah.
without our LPAs here to know what to do.
I completely agree.
Now, why do we have to make things harder? I thought the last special meeting was proposing that things may be relaxed, so more people can get into this different licenses. Why are we trying to make things harder?
That's what we're talking about is we didn't propose any rules last meeting. That was a blank canvas discussion of like what do we do to solve obvious problems that we all acknowledge that exist. This is the work product from staff that came out of all of the discussions that we had. In terms of just the rulemaking procedure, right now it's on the table to propose this rule, which we would solicit public comment again at the next board meeting to where we could actually pass it up to BHEC to actually be put into rule. And so the point I think that our attorney was making is that I'm going to try to restate what you said to make sure I understand it too. If we've proposed a rule, we can back off of that rule without re-proposing the rule. If we propose a rule and then increase the standard on this rule that we're doing, we would have to re-propose, and it essentially takes a whole nother cycle of a board meeting. Is that accurate?
it takes more than that because there's several layers, right, where we have to go through BHEC and everything.
Right.
I think, Dr. Becker, I think that would work, where if we added it with the duly licensed and then we wanted to adopt it, making it less stringent, I think that would comport with Daryl's in agreement. He's thinking that
We can taketh away, we can't addeth to later on.
generally speaking, yes, I think so.
And I don't want to avoid Dr. Singh's question. I don't think we're trying to make it harder. I think what we're trying to do is be respectful of the question. If we are trying to make it meaningful to give LPAs a different avenue by which to seek a different set of licensure, the question is whether an LSSP alone, who gets no training in supervision, no training in LPA, has the skills and training to then train someone who is not trained in what they do and is trained in something else to then train them to do that other thing.
Yeah.
So I think that's really the question from a licensure perspective is, would someone who only has a different training be able to then cross-train that individual? So the question is, do they need both licensures to cross-train an individual who has a different licensure? So it's really a question of, is it enough? Not, are we restricting? So, and that is a question that I'm saying from the outset, I do not have the skill set to answer, and we don't have our people on the board who are really informed to answer it. And I don't have an LSSP either, so I don't know if our LSSPs on the board can answer that question, because I sure as heck can't.
They told me they're watching, so I hope they're putting their thinking caps on right
Yeah.
now. So.
I am just speaking my mind because you guys expect me to do that, but I'm also thinking through the procedural aspects of, we are going to do this the right way and make it right for the people of Texas, but we have to be thoughtful about this because we can't undo these things once we do them. So I just want to make sure that we go about this in the right way.
Is Dr. Carter LSSP?
I
Dr.
believe-
Cartwright? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So should we not table this until he's present?
So I think that's what we're saying is, if we make the motion to, that's what we're asking, is if we make this motion to change, we can progress this so that we could actually move it forward. And at our next meeting, we would have the ability to move this process without slowing it down so much that we're going to be at a snail's pace. We could actually keep the conversation going and move the progress of the legislature forward without making decisions without the informed people at the table, and also give the public a chance to come back and comment on it. So we're kind of hedging our bets here by saying, let's make the change that the people at the table are kind of saying, okay, we're hearing our public comment that's here. We're making the change based on the best information that we have that we think makes sense. And then we're going to let everybody else comment. We're going to get the rest of the minds at the table. But we still have the ability to dial it back if we at the table have not made the best decision. And our lawyer is saying that we have the ability to do that if we've messed it up.
We can.
So that feels like the
Yeah.
informed decision.
We can still bail out. We can
Yeah.
still. That's my goal, is to move the ball and know that if we've screwed this up or whatever, we can still bail out on it.
Is it telling that John and I agree?
Would the chair consider having this issue given to an appropriate committee and letting them look at it and?
It's a good question.
Yes.
That-
And then bring it back to.
That's a good question. If we do that, though, it's in the same place of a holding pattern and not moving forward. And all of these, I mean, candidly, all of these ideas we're talking about today came out of essentially a committee of the whole at the last special meeting. So in a way, we've sort of already done that. But if the goal is to progress it, we need to move it today. And we need to move it in a way that we can change it. And I feel like that's adding some language to this, some more restrictive language to this, that we can take away later. And I'm fully confident in our members who are not here who can think about this and come with their A game, the next meeting to figure out what do we want to do with it.
So then I'm just going to go ahead and motion to change this language to a duly licensed specialist in school psychology and licensed psychological associate.
Ms. Moore, you're taking our notes on that? You got that?
Did I do that correctly, Patrick?
I get exactly what you're talking about, is the other individual.
The other individual. So
Yeah.
instead of, sorry, I turned my microphone off. So that or sentence
Yeah,
or a duly licensed.
yeah. So we might want to go through some of the other changes before we
Oh,
vote on
perfect.
this one. But I would suggest changing it to or an individual license as both an LPA and LSSP, something to that effect.
I'm down with that.
Okay.
I'll let you wordsmith
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
All right, so are we,
I was just trying to move forward.
no, that's good. Patrick, did you say that you wanted other to fix the rest of this, or is that a good enough motion for now?
That's a good enough,
Tackle that.
we can come back to this, because I don't know if you want to dive into A4, any of the graduate level coursework. Is it something you feel it's necessary to have all of those listed? Do you want to look at the applied psychology, or do you just want to leave
I
A4
feel like
alone?
this was the main thing we heard in public comment that I think needs tweaking, and in the discussion up here, it feels like this is,
A4?
yeah, this is good for now. So, board, y'all have heard the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been seconded by Mr. Bridges. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Motion carries. All right, so this will be up for passing on to BHEC next time as amended.
Next week. at
Yes,
their
but we
meeting.
can still amend it.
Well, it'll get proposed, but you obviously don't have to adopt it.
Right.
When it comes back after it's proposed, you can
Right.
review the comments and re-review the rule. If I can just ask two quick questions. On C5, there's a suggested addition about adding a provisionally licensed psychologist, and then D, potentially getting rid of the gap provision. Do you want to hold off on those, or you just want to table those? I just wanted to make sure you didn't forget about those.
If we do something with the gap rule, we'll need to come back to this one, correct?
Correct.
So maybe we just go to the gap rule and we'll come back.
But this isn't the gap rule. This is the one that allows basically psychology interns and psychology postdoctoral fellows to progress under this, and then it's the gap rule. So 5 is the pathway for
Right.
psychology interns and fellows. Then you have the gap rule.
Right, I'm talking, okay, I was talking about D, so sorry.
Okay.
What do we want to do on 5? Leave it or change it, or, sorry, I'm not following.
So I mean, I'm good with that. I don't know if everybody else is.
Essentially, we just voted and proposed,
It allows
This-
provisionally licensed psychologists to get an LPA or an LSSP under this.
It's
It's an LPA.
a so 5 talks about applicants as a licensed as a specialist in school psychology may utilize experience required under that license if it was supervised by a licensed psychologist. Meaning, this is the provision that's talking about the ability for an LPA to get independent practice. So what this is then saying is, if somebody was an LSSP and they get licensed and they were already got supervision under an LP, they can use those 3,000 hours to then get independent practice. This would also add those that had their postdoc getting like a provisionally licensed psychologist that did a postdoc under an LP. They can use those 3,000 if they had 3,000 hours, or if it was just the 1,750. They can count that 1,750 and then get the remaining 1,750 to then get independent practice. But currently, it doesn't allow for those. So there's been times when somebody is able to achieve their provisional license as a psychologist, but then they weren't able to achieve the LP, and so we would say, well, you can go back and get an LPA, and so they would qualify for that. But then they'd have to start all their supervised experience all over again, and they wouldn't be able to count that postdoc, which to me seems like it would be in line with the same sort of supervised experience they should be getting. Does that make sense or no?
I think I get it. I think it's,
Jimmy, back up, sorry.
what we're trying, it seems like what we're looking at here is scenarios where people have to go back to start and redo things that they've already done, or try to achieve competency that they already have. And to me, this comports with that ethos of, if you've already done the supervision, like.
Yeah, what it currently allows an LSSP that had supervision under an LP to count those hours of supervision towards that 3,000 hours for independent practice. And so what adding provisional would do, it would allow that person that did a postdoc but couldn't achieve their license as a psychologist, but it would allow them to take those hours that they did under supervision and then count them for independent practice as an LPA.
Yeah.
So it's their practice as an LPA.
Right.
That's okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
That's what I thought.
So we
Yeah.
don't need an action on this because we essentially amended this as we just did with that in there. So.
Oh, you didn't vote on C5. You voted on
Oh, okay.
A2.
Okay, so essentially you're saying we voted on amending this before actually overall proposing it, essentially. Is that right?
Right. This, I don't think there was a vote on this provision, so that's why we would not propose this unless you want to
Okay.
take action on it.
So, all right. Any further discussion on this or questions? Is there any action or motions to add this?
I'll motion to add as written. What is this? 5A?
Is it C5?
C5.
At 463.8. Adding applicant's license as specialist in school psychology, or as a provisionally licensed psychologist. All right, it's been moved and seconded. It's been moved by Dr. Becker, seconded by Dr. Calhoun. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. The ayes have it. Thank you very much. All right. Do we have any other deletions or anything you need on that?
It sounds like we may need to come back to the gap
Yeah.
provision. So we'll table D, I guess, for now, and then move on to the next rule.
463.9. Give everybody a chance, including myself, to get that on our screen. Patrick, do you just want to lay this out for us real quick while
Sure, absolutely. So subsection D is where, subsection C is kind of a typo correction, adding accredited or approved by National Association of School Psychologists. To see that Daryl and I looked at that just seemed to make sense to add that kind of clarification. And then D, D's broken out into sort of three subparts. And that was based on some of the comment we received at the last meeting about trying to, I guess it's sort of self-explanatory, but it's kind of trying to create a pathway for those that are taking the additional coursework, to get, meet all the requirements for an LSSP. And so that's why 3 is sort of the new addition. A lot of what's already in 1 and 2 are essentially what was already in the rule. So 3 is really just the new stuff. While 1 does have a new underlined sentence, I think that's taken from the old language. It was just from the lower part of that paragraph. So the other part of it is in E, just for a point of discussion, there's a lot of coursework listed there. In the statute, there are 5 sections, 5 areas that are required, but all of these are not necessarily required by statute, all of the 7. So if you wanted to make them shorter, you could, but it would need to have at least the 5 that come from the statute. One of them also, E3 is not included in the LPA rule, the educational foundations, but I believe that is in the statute. So there was really not a lot of wiggle room in changing that if we're trying to make sort of pathways between those two types of licenses.
I heard Ms. Arnold talk about this, about I think part of essentially the guardrails of this was the fact that we had these requirements in there in terms of the coursework. She's nodding her head. Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, and there's we're not necessarily advocating for it. We're just saying we're looking at it. I think I understood the discussion to look at to say if there's a way for somebody that holds one of our licenses to move between and able to get another license, is there a way that we can make that work? But I don't. The main thing I would say here is that obviously, like, there's the extensive internship that they're going to have to do with the for the LSSP, and that's far above and beyond what's required for the LPA. So it's really not an apples to apples. You know, they have to take the praxis. But the one thing I would say is, if you wanted to, you could reduce the amount to 5 than the 7 listed there, because the five listed in subsection E are required by statute. There are, let's see, E1, E3, E4, E5, and E6 are required by the statute.
You said
But
E1.
E1, E3, E4, E5, and E6 are all in the statute, but the others are not listed in the statute. So those would be the minimum you would have to have in it. But if you, again, we can leave it alone as well if you don't want to change it.
Is this a section that we were talking about, or that I think it might have been Ms. Arnold had talked about revising to map onto the NASP? We had lots of discussions about revising to map onto what are the NASP recommendations that are slightly different than this, but have more broad and kind of national domains that are not just regionally accepted, but nationally accepted? Okay, got it.
And one of the issues with that is we have a statute that would require those 5 listed there. So when we looked at it, it looked like a impossible apples and oranges comparison. Not saying that there might be something before the meeting, we did not find a way to make those two.
Right, and that was what they were saying, they were taking to the state first, right?
We'll also be proposing it in January, yes.
Okay. Okay, because that was my understanding, is that the school folks were going to take it to the state first and then petition us afterwards to change all of this. That was what we had talked about in the last meeting, right? I'm just, again, I don't have a dog in this race, so I listened real carefully.
Okay, so this is we're in the same position here of proposing this to move it forward. We can still take public comment, we can still amend, still take away.
Are you looking for a motion?
Discussion or action on it? Yes, sir.
I mean, I'll make the motion if we want to do that.
Floor's open. Oh, you're moving to approve it?
Oh, yeah.
Been
Sorry.
moved to propose this, 463-9 as proposed. Is there a second? I'm sorry, what?
Can I just get a clarification on the motion? Is it the changes to C and D?
Sorry, yes, it's good clarifying. I'm looking at, yes, C and then all the subsections in D. All right, that's the motion. Is there a second?
I can move to motion to adopt it.
Okay, is that a second then? Second by Dr. Lambden. Any discussion?
Can I just ask, so then, if folks want to change those things under E, that would just be revisiting this afterwards, right? It would just be a whole different ball of wax.
That would be a substantially different rule that would need to be reproposed if we were to mess with
Okay,
E.
so we can do all of this and then come back to that as a totally different subject.
To E as a later proposal, yes. We can only have the rule out as proposed in one version, though, so we'd have to adopt it or withdraw it. But yes, the short
Okay.
answer is yes.
Okay, got it.
All right. Hearing no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Thank you very much. Moving right along. Get back to my agenda. All right, so we're going to go on to 463-11. Council, will you lay this out for us again?
Yes, you'll see in 46311 in subsection B1, PC SAS is added to the list of APA and CPA, and it's also, a mention of that is also later in 2, and B2. And then C2 is the gap provision, getting rid of that, all of C2. And then the next part is in a new subsection E. The remaining subsections, they should be underlined, but I was not able to get that accommodated with fighting with Word. But subsection E was something that I talked to Daryl about, and he and I discussed, and it was essentially, while there are remediation plans where somebody doesn't meet that, the issue will be is that they'll essentially have to get themselves in that position and then have to come before the board on a case-by-case basis. And so based on the discussion about trying to promote more services in underserved areas, what this would do is it would have HPSA designated areas as rural areas, and that in those particular instances, the two provisions that we always hear, my internship can't get a second intern, or I can't get a second supervisor. That's where E would come into play and say, okay, well, now if you are in one of these designated areas, you can actually create an internship and have people do an internship that we will then license. So it's letting them know that they can go and start setting those up to then provide services in those areas. So that was one of the I think the discussions that came up from the meeting before. And then in G, talking about the respecialization area, a lot of these deal with, if we get rid of the gap rule, those also have to be deleted as well, because they all reference that gap provision.
So this is kind of tackling three. It's all in the same rule, but they all seem very loosely, if at all, related. Is that completely inaccurate, or?
Which parts, I guess?
I mean, all the like the PC SAS. I mean, that's its own thing. The gap rule is kind of its own thing, and now we're talking about rural internships. They're kind of all three.
The
different
rural
things.
internship is different.
Yeah.
I have a question. If I understand it correctly, that we're making this special provision for them to start an internship in rural areas for themselves, huh? Right?
Well, it would have to be under supervision, but if they wanted to create an internship in a rural area.
Well, what if they create and they get their license and then close that and then goes practice in Dallas?
Yeah, we can't force them to.
How about like in the armed forces, like in Air Force, they will pay for your PhD. They'll get you through license, or you have to sign up for a certain number of years to serve as a psychologist. So can we require something like that, that if you do use that avenue, then you will have to practice in the rural areas for at least 3 or 5 years, whatever.
I was just gonna say, I feel like that would be a nightmare to manage, like to try to keep track of that. That just seems like a disaster waiting to happen. Honestly.
Otherwise, you're creating a loophole that lots of people don't want to move to, let's say, Houston to do their internship, like from San Angelo, because we're starting a PsyD program in fall, and we're having some of these questions. And they will set up a practice in Ballinger, and they don't want to move out of the community. And then after they get the license, then they stop that and do whatever they want to do. So that's not really solving the problem. That's just creating easier ways of getting people to do their internship.
I agree with her. Being in a rural area, if persons are going to do internships in rural areas and special provisions are going to be made, then I think there ought to be some requirement that they remain in the rural area for X number of years, because it does us no good to have them train and leave.
I think there's two bigger issues here. and I will bring up the issues that we continue to discuss every time lowering this licensure standard comes into play. There's a reason that these two standards exist. One, personally, I'm okay with being a little squirrely on, which is having 2 interns there, because I think that in a rural area, getting 2 people to practice there is going to be a challenge. And to me, that is one that, from a practice standpoint, I can understand how we might not be able to work that out. The 2 supervisors, I don't know how else to explain this. This is a standard of practice that cannot be worked around. It exists for very standardized reasons. You have issues related to due practice. You have issues related to training. You have issues related to just the power differential in having a supervisory relationship in training that exist in mental health that cannot be ended around. And what we discussed in this room a month ago was that the incentives that we can put out here as a licensing board to promote supervisors to supervise in rural areas make a whole lot of sense. But exempting the internship is going to impact the way that education and training exists at the doctoral level, which is not something that this licensing board can do. And this rule will impact doctoral programs, which is an overstep of this licensing board. And that I have a problem with.
I agree with that.
I concur. I think that one of the things that we've worked hard to do is to adopt supervision through telepsychology, through the internet. And that really kind of helps and opens up that avenue of allowing other supervisors to be able to supervise interns in rural settings. And that should be an assistance to overcome the limitation of having somebody in the same place, in the same physical space. And so, again, I think that we just need to wait to see and maybe provide incentives, and I think that's already being looked at and proposed in some of the other places, to encourage supervisors to be able to consider or make a commitment to that role. Now, again, I concur with Dr. Becker that, again, this is outside of our purview in a way, but also this is essential to the training and the formation of a psychologist, somebody that provides mental health services, because when you look at, if you look at the analogy of, residents in the medical profession, we can look at it in terms of having rounds. You improve, you benefit from listening to other cases and how those are handled and how they present and all of that. It is just part of the essential training that needs to take place. So I do concur. I think it's essential, and I don't think that we really, I think we need to be very cautious and conservative in eliminating these requirements.
I think we're coming back to, with this, there's multiple things tackled in this single proposed rule. If we want to do that, it obviously sounds like there's zero appetite to tackle that section E. Sorry, what was the number of that one?
The Z.
Yeah. What do we think about the gap rule, and what do we think about PC SAS?
I think the PC SAS addendums and the gap rule make perfect sense to me, and those are all kind of outdated and updates that, we talked about are ways to kind of get with the times and to throw out rules that just don't seem to, that are more administrative process that we just don't seem to need, and that stuff makes perfect sense to me.
If we're going to go that direction, Patrick, what are the specific, I want to make sure if we were going to make a motion to move this forward, making sure that we strip out the things that we don't want to do in proposing this and making sure we leave in the things we do want to do and just be clean about it. So section E, hang on, what was the number again? Was it 3E?
Sorry, one second.
3 subsection E for,
So it would be C2 is the gap rule.
we're going to leave that one in there.
You want to keep the gap rule or get rid of the?
No,
gap
we want to, sorry, we want to leave it in the leave
Yeah.
the edit in the rule. Yeah, we're going to strip out 3E of what we're going to propose, though.
Right. E would not be there, and let me just double check.
What about subsection G1C?
Yeah, so those all
Those are
deal
ga-
with the gap rule.
That's gap, okay.
Yeah, but I think that's actually F under the current rule. That's why I'm double checking real fast because we had inserted E in here, and so it
Yeah.
reset everything.
So essentially, there could be a motion to strip out of this proposal subsection, I gotta get it right, 3E, leaving everything else in there, with the clarification that you can clean up misnumbering and mislettering of things by that deletion.
I believe that's correct. Sorry, I'm trying to look at this real fast. It would be F, yeah. F, the changes to F, it wouldn't be G, because of, so if it's getting rid of all that, it would be C2, and then the changes to F, F1C, and F3.
Can we just make a motion to delete section E and adopt all other changes as proposed?
Sure.
That's a clean way, and we've got a clean
I'm
base
sorry,
document.
I'm just trying to make life real easy for you, Patrick.
Thank you, Dr. Becker.
Do you also, I guess you can be done in a separate motion for the LPA rule that has the.
We'll have to come back to that
Okay.
one. Yeah, let's just come back to that. Let's keep this as clean as.
I'd like to make a motion to strike section E and adopt all other changes to 46311 as proposed.
Heard the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been seconded by Mr. Ryan. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Thank you very much. All right, let's go back, since we just did that on the gap rule. Get my numbers right. It was 463.8 we need to look at again, I believe.
Correct.
Look at me. Would that be subsection
D.
D there on page, second to last page of that? We would strike, notwithstanding subsection C3 of this section, an application for independent practice may be denied if a gap of more than 2 years exists between the completion of the supervised experience required for independent practice and the date of application for independent practice. The rules governing the waiver of gaps related to supervised experience found in Council Rule 46311 shall govern any request for a waiver under this rule. So this, deleting that just comports with what we just did. So, any discussion? Any motions?
Are you on 46335? 463.8A.
What's that? What is that section again? D. Full number.
It's just 463.8 subsection D,
To delete.
and
that.
it's all of D. Yeah.
Is there a motion to delete that?
I'll motion to delete
It's been moved.
463.8D.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Thank you very much. Motion carries. All right. 463.35. Professional development.
So.
Patrick, you want to lay this out for us?
Yes. a bunch of this has already been looked at previously, and it is up for, let me see, I believe it's currently published for proposal, but what we can do is pull it down and repropose it. But what isn't is that if you look at the, I guess the version you have isn't necessarily highlighted, but there's two options for a number 7 and a number 8, and those are essentially going back to the previous discussion about trying to provide some incentive for services in a rural area. It's any particular number. It doesn't necessarily have to be the numbers that are suggested, but it's giving some sort of credit, for professional development if they provide services in those particular areas. So one is for supervision and one is for actual services being provided. The other thing, just real quickly to skim over, is in subsection G, there's a notwithstanding subsection E above. That's something that, so this was one of the rules that came through the standardization committee that we were trying to standardize the general format of it, and that was something that was a clarification to show that, I think it's a helpful sort of clarification to say that subsection G isn't modified by E. That was the way that the rule was always intended when it was written, but that was just something that the other two boards, the MFT board and the social work board, have both moved forward with that particular change. Just purely for your reference, some of the other changes that some of the other boards have made, the social worker board changed G4 from a graduate level course to a university or college level course. They also license bachelor's level social workers, so they changed it from graduate to university level. That's one of the changes they made. We're not necessarily advocating one way or the other, just kind of putting it out there. I will say I go to a lot of continuing legal education courses, and I remember my undergrad courses, and in comparison, I don't necessarily think that the continuing legal education courses I went to were necessarily that much better than the undergrad courses. But I'm not necessarily advocating the change. I just wanted to point that out, that the other boards are doing that. And in 5, we got a lot of comments on self-study, that people didn't understand what self-study was. We added a really lengthy explanation to self-study. Daryl and I looked at it. We were fine with adding it, but we don't like adding it because it just makes the rule so much longer. So I just wanted to let you know that the other rules will have a lengthy explanation. If you wanted to add it, that's something you can obviously discuss, but I'm not going to advocate to add it. And I think that is all, and I think that's it for the rule.
Can I ask a question, because I don't understand? Are we discussing whether to choose each of these 7s, or is this actually going to go in that folks may do one of these two things? Is this going in the rule as an or?
No.
You get
Or we're going to pick one of these two?
Yes.
7 is you get all your hours, and 7 is you can get up to 28 hours of the 40.
Right. So I guess I'm asking, are there 2 Rule 7s that are being proposed? It's going in as an or is we as a board choosing one of the written?
The latter.
You get
Got
to,
it.
You get
Okay.
to pick which one of these
Thank
you
you.
like. Or
I was confused by that.
Okay.
or if you like neither of them, we can.
So if we can delve right in, I was reading this, the number 7 proposed under G, and I think it's I think it's risky, really, to allow somebody to be able to count all of their continuing education hours. If we look at worst-case scenario, if somebody is there during, maybe 2 cycles of licensure, you really have maybe 4 years of never looking at an ethics course or never doing other things, engaging in other sort of continuing education requirements. I'm not opposed to this, but I think it has to be measured. I think that's part of why we're here. Just my opinion.
So you're thinking the maximum should be capped, it shouldn't be blanket.
Yes, I think the maximum maximum should be capped. But also not just capped, I think that, if we look at number 7 under the or, it says providing psychological services in the form of direct contact, telehealth or in person to individuals residing in a rural mental health discipline identified by HPSA. The maximum number of hours that may be claimed for this activity are 28. I'm not sure about that cap. That seems, given that we require a minimum of 40, that is almost 75%. So that I think we need to really think about as well, and for how long, how many cycles, is this indefinitely if somebody chooses to practice, for all of their career in a rural setting? I think that's something for us to consider. So just some thoughts.
I'm with Roxana. I feel very strongly that CE to me is not an optional thing, and no matter where you practice, you should be required to do at least some of it. And personally, I don't think anybody should be exempt from ethics ever, but that's just me. I also think that something to think about is that I'm not sure that direct clinical practice is equivalent to CE. And so for me, I feel like that practice as, CEs are something that we can offer. I think we talked about reduced registration fees or reduced licensure fees as something that we could offer for clinical practice, which seems a much more equivalent offering. For me, I wouldn't offer more than 4 CE reductions for direct clinical practice because to me they're not equivalent. Supervision, on the other hand, is about ethics. It is about diversity. It is about thinking and education. It's about training. And so there is an equivalency to some degree in continuing education because you are constantly having to think and train and talk about things and process through what is new and different and coming to your attention. So there is an equivalency there that makes sense in why you would offer continuing education for supervision. It also promotes the, what is the word that I'm looking for? The paying it forward of promoting more people out in rural areas and not just me and my practice, which does nothing because once you're full, then you just have your patient population and it does nothing to propagate actually getting more providers out in rural areas. And so then all we're doing is creating inequality in how we are promoting practice. And if you are in a rural area, you get a subsidy. And if you're in an urban area, you don't. And that really doesn't make sense either. So I think if we are going to talk about what we are doing and why we are doing it, we are providing this benefit for the propagation of practice in a rural area. And if we are doing it, it makes sense to do it in a more meaningful way for supervision. And I would look at that doing it either for between 20, which would be half, or 28 without the exception for ethics and diversity, which to me should be required for everyone in a 2-year cycle. And I'll get off my soapbox.
So it sounds like seven, both of those sound like non-starters.
That's just me.
Okay.
Again, I'm welcome for
No,
other people to put in their opinion.
I'm trying
I'm
to
just
just
willing to talk about it.
Yeah, I just want to understand where you're coming from here. It sounds like 8, though. It sounds like there's maybe some wood to chop on 8.
I think 8 is a great rule. I think 8 makes a lot of sense, and that's what we were talking about. We can do this. This makes a ton of sense.
The second one or the first one or 2?
8.
You got 2 8s to choose from.
8 for me. I don't think there is ever a place where culture where what's it called? Where CEs should just disappear for people. So for me, it's the second version of 8 that makes the most sense.
Is it, because I heard you talk about ethics and diversity, instead of including ethics and cultural diversity, could you say excluding ethics and cultural diversity?
But then that is Rule 8.
Well,
Because
not-
those 12 hours are ethics and diversity. We require 6 hours of ethics and
Okay.
6 hours of diversity, so by rule.
Okay, so you're saying if we just passed the second version of 8 there, or propose the second version of 8, you're good with that there? Okay.
I would just like to say that I'm willing to consider the second version of 8. However, I would propose, and I would like all of us to think about, do we want to put a cap on this? How many licensing cycles? Because really, when you think about this, in terms of people trained in rural settings to trainees, you're really, in a way, over the long term, you're giving them a supervisor that hasn't received any CEUs in other areas other than diversity and ethics for years, and that turns into a substandard supervisor.
I can speak. I mean, obviously, I'm not a doctor or mental health practitioner, but in terms of supervision, like, I have to do that as a real estate broker. And I can say and I'm working on this with some of my guys, making the transition from being the guy providing the services versus being the guy or gal coaching and teaching. And that, I will say that continual coaching and teaching is the fullest form of learning. I'm less concerned about, like, cycles. I think the point of capping this to where you do have to go in for some CEs.
I appreciate Dr. Lambden's point, and maybe what that becomes is maybe 28 is the wrong number, and maybe it's 20, and maybe it's half your CEs, and we just half everything. So you're required 3 ethics and 3 diversity, and you have to do half of your CEs, and we subsidize half your CEs.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, then rather than 6 hours of ethics each and cultural diversity, it's 3 hours each. And what did you say about the others?
Well, that's just it. Is I'm proposing that we subsidize half your CEs.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it would be 3 hours of ethics and 3 hours of diversity every 2 years, and you still are required half of it. And then maybe we leave it at 28, and you're only required to do 3 and 3, and then the other 6 have to be in something else. Maybe we half your diversity and your ethics requirement, and the other 6 that you are required to do for the state have to be in something else.
Yeah, I'm not sure why we need to touch ethics and cultural diversity.
Well, if you're only required to do 12 CEs, is why I would say reduce it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know how other people feel about that. I'm less inclined to reduce ethics and cultural diversity. I think that ethics are where most people get into trouble.
That's probably true.
And I think we need to continue to refresh and update, as laws are enacted and different, it's a dynamic field, really, and I think we need to keep people abreast of all of that. But I am inclined to reduce the number of CEs or keep them at 28. But like I said, I would like to see the 6 and 6 remain.
I appreciate where everyone's coming from on this. I guess just zooming out for a second, the purpose of this is to incentivize people to go practice in rural health areas, correct? Mm-hmm. It feels like, in terms of like the carrot and stick analogy, a carrot or some vegetables is not that great of a incentive. Like, it feels like we need to be offering someone steak, and we're whittling this down to the point that I'm questioning the effectiveness of the objective here of incentivizing people to practice in rural areas. And I respect, where y'all are coming from in terms of making sure that we don't go wheels off on continuing education. But are we going to end up with something that just beats around the edges of it and doesn't actually do the stated objective?
I have a question. How is supervising somebody going to be keeping me updated on diversity and ethics?
I didn't say it would. I said that I said that you would be required to address some of those topics as part of supervision, but it's not going to.
But how I'm gonna address them if I'm not keeping up to date on them myself?
I agree.
So I don't think those two areas should be included in there, as you originally said.
No, I agree with that. I am trying to look for opportunities for compromise, which I think that we have to keep in mind that there's got to be a way forward here. We've got to think about where we can meet in the middle, and maybe we take this from 28 to 24. Okay, so that's more than half, less than just your ethics and diversity. Okay, that's 4 hours of continuing education outside of ethics and diversity. I
think
mean,
we should
maybe
start
that's
with
something.
20, like you said in the originally, and see how it goes. And if nobody takes them up on it, then we increase, incentive. But to start out with high, then you don't have much room to increase incentive if you needed to.
One other small point I think we ought to do is in number 7, we were very explicit about psychological services being provided via telehealth or in person. I would like to see that we call that out in the supervision as well, that supervision is being provided either via telehealth or in person. Just so it becomes very explicit that we are encouraging telesupervision as well as a solution in rural areas, and that we are encouraging that as a pathway.
I agree with that. I think it's important to put it in there and be precise.
Dr. Becker, so where it says providing supervision and then just put via telehealth or
E.g. telehealth or in person.
Right there. Okay. And just for the thought of it, I know the purpose behind us drafting these was to try to promote services in rural areas. So it sounds like it's a non-starter, even the second 7, where again 28 is just a number that was thrown out there. It does not necessarily the number, but you wouldn't consider giving 5 hours or 10 hours or anything for even providing services.
I mean, again, I think we could I don't know how other people feel. I would not personally give more than about 4.
I feel like getting supervisors out there is important, but I feel like you gotta give something to people like that are actually putting boots on the ground out there.
Okay, then for argument's sake, why would you not give 4 hours or any hours to someone that serves in MHMR in Dallas County or Harris County or any other underserved government-funded facility or serves for CPS in any district in an urban area? Then it becomes a differential level of care. It really does. When you are talking about rural versus urban, you have shortages in other places. You have shortages of mental health providers all over Texas. It is not just in rural areas. But if we are going to incentivize to try and promote, we cannot forget that we have mental health shortages everywhere. And practice and direct contact is different than supervision. Supervision is our problem in rural areas and getting people out in rural areas. The issue of direct contact is not an issue with supervision, and it is not an issue with how we license people. So that's my issue with it.
I think it's a complicated issue, in terms of addressing the shortages of mental health providers across the state. But I think, we were trying to address rural areas specifically because we have seen consistently that this is where providers are short. But also we need to also think about that this is not all under our purview. You know, we have issues with Medicaid. We have issues with, you know, pay and incentives. There are other things to look at that are not also, we can do other things and make other recommendations, or form committees that can make recommendations. But I think it's too complicated to try to address everything all at once.
I guess I'm confused. I feel like at the last meeting, I heard psychologists talking about this as the solution, one of the solutions, like to.
I want to go back to the idea that I really do think that as much as I really do want to come back to this. I think that going down to 3 ethics, 3 diversity, if we stick with this 28, it's not a reduction, because what we would be saying if we went down to 20 hours, don't forget our cycle is 2 years. So what we're basically saying is that we're subsidizing you for 1 year of your CEUs. So what we're saying is we're only going to require you to do 1 year of your CEUs in ethics and diversity. And I think that that is a reasonable compromise. So if we say that you must do 3 hours of diversity and 3 hours of ethics, that leaves you 6 hours to do something else. So 12 hours of CEUs every 2 years. I think that is the compromise that we are making to subsidize the supervision in rural areas. That to me feels like a reasonable compromise, and it still requires ethics, diversity, and something else.
So how would are we talking about section 8 here? Mm-hmm. Can you kind of put that in the form of the rule there, and how that what I agree with that. I think I can.
Right. So the maximum number of hours that can be claimed for this activity is 28. 3 hours of ethics and 3 hours of cultural diversity must be included in the remaining 12 competency hours.
Ethics, diversity.
And 3 hours of cultural diversity must be included in the remaining 12 competency hours.
Okay, so make sure, I'm going to restate that a little bit. So the point is, leave it essentially as it is, append to the end of it, but you still must do 3 hours of ethics, 3 hours of cultural diversity.
Mm-hmm.
That's concerning to me because we're dropping ethics by 3 hours, cultural diversity by 3 hours. And when you look at what's going on in other professions, not only are they increasing diversity, ethics, they're adding inclusion. So I think we need to look at inclusion as well.
We can do 4 and 4. I mean, I'm just trying to meet in the middle on here,
I'll
right? Should we do 4 and 4, and then that
Perfect.
leaves them 4 for something else?
Sure.
Because I think the problem is if we leave it at 6 and 6, they don't have room to do anything else, and that's problematic too. Mm-hmm. Because then they're not training on anything other than diversity and ethics, and I think that's problematic as well. Yeah.
I think perhaps we should consider reducing the 28 to another number so that they can. I like you, Dr. Becker, but I disagree with you on this. I really do think that we need.
I'm okay with disagreement.
I think we need, 6 hours of ethics and 6 hours of cultural diversity. I think we can look at reducing the 28 to something else.
I didn't come up with that.
I have a question. So, Patrick, how are we going to see this and track this? Assume we do this. How do we see this in terms of renewals and whatnot? When it's claimed, it's going to show up on their application, or
No, it'll be on the renewals, and so typically when they do renewals, they have to input like what CEs they've done, and then if you get audited, which is 5% of all licensees will get audited, then they'll have to provide proof of those particular things. So that's how you'll see it.
So back to the idea of like, are we offering a carrot or a stick? I am concerned that this is going to do not enough to incentivize people to actually go utilize this. To Dr. Singh, I think it was Dr. Singh's point about we will be able to see in a year or 2 years' time, has anybody claim this incentive, essentially, correct? In our renewals, we'll see if people are claiming this, right?
I'm sure we will. I'm just not sure how we could look that up. Like if there's a report we could run, I don't honestly know that we.
But it would be on the renewal.
Well, they would have to claim it in some way on the renewal, and then I imagine.
But we don't put that information in of what they claimed or.
Well, they do enter it, like they do enter what they've done in the coursework. We don't. Sorry.
It changed. Now you just test that you had your hours.
That you did it, yeah.
Type it all in.
So we're not even gonna have a way to track this.
Didn't we also talk, we talked in this room, there was a young woman sitting right where Ms. Arnold is sitting, who was affiliated with a university out in West Texas, who had volunteered to work with us in the state around setting up basically a program by which supervisors could register and that they would do the monitoring for us. Anybody remember this?
Sort of. Maybe.
Right? And that we would require supervisors to go through this and that they would track all of this and that we would not be responsible for this. Anybody remember this?
Not responsible for tracking the CEs?
Yes. SFA? Oh yeah, it was Sam Austin. Stephen F. Austin. Yeah. Sorry, I'm not from Texas. not from Texas right here. I know. But it was the Stephen F. Austin program because they were the ones saying that they had the students, they didn't have the supervisors. And that they would help make all the connections and that they were willing to work with folks to make the connections and that they would help with kind of the tracking and the connecting and sort of the oversight so that we didn't have to do all of the administrative background work. Does no one remember this conversation that we had on the 30th?
I remember it. It wasn't quite that specific, but they were providing all kinds of. They want to start that program.
They were motivated, and they said that they would pony up and do a lot of the administrative work behind this.
I seem to remember that too. How does that? I'm not sure how we, as an agency, as a function of the rule in front of us, how those two go together right now. It's not. It's not. If it does, I don't see how it's ready to move on at this moment.
Is there a way that we could, insert a little box that might say, I am claiming exemption for services, and then checking that box on the application, on the renewal application, and then you would be able to provide whatever it is that we all decide is sufficient to be able to validate that claim?
For the tracking purposes, is that
Yeah.
what you're talking about? I don't think that, it sounds like that they've changed because part of the renewal process is we're not just renewing psychology, we're renewing social work and MFT and LPC, and so that's using essentially the same system. So I don't know that's it. I remember what they were doing at psychology. I don't recall exactly all the things that they're doing now for the renewal when they're asking for renewals, but it sounds like they've streamlined it a lot, and they're not asking for all of that information. So I don't know that that's a possibility. Is basically what I'm telling you, because you're again, it's going to have to go back to the database that they're using whenever people are entering this information, and so. A lot of times when they want to make a change in the database, it is a very costly expense to add something or change something in the database. So my guess is that's probably not. I don't know that that's something that if they're not asking for it, if we're not inputting it anymore, then it's not something that I don't think it's going to be able to be tracked that way.
Yeah. Any suggestions about what do we have at our disposal?
But you're
to
just
be able
wanting
to track it?
You're just wanting to know data, basically, kind of to see who's using it if we implement something.
Are we
like
being
this.
successful?
Yeah.
If we're gonna go through all the rigmarole of making this, and can we track it, and will it even make a difference? Because I'm not, I mean, for 20 hours of continuing education, like, is somebody going to pack up and go to Laredo? Like, I don't know.
Well, we're actually not asking them to. We're asking them if they will get on their computer for 1 hour every 2 weeks and support a student that already lives in Laredo.
Yes.
That's legitimately
Fair.
what we're asking them to do.
Fair.
And so I think there are some folks who would be incentivized to do that. For half of their CEs, that kind of seems legit.
But how are we going to track it, I guess that's the thing.
Yeah.
And if we can't track it, it's just kind of academic.
Yeah.
How many HIPSA areas are there? Do we know?
I don't know.
I mean, that
I think there's quite a few. I don't know the numbers.
Right knows.
Yeah.
okay. Because, you know, we were talking earlier about Stephen F. Austin.
Yeah.
It's 50 miles away from Tyler, and Tyler has a fairly large psychology program. So, you know, maybe we need to look at the designation for HIPSA.
It feels like there's not a whole lot of consensus on this right now, and maybe it needs to go back to Rules Committee or something to where we can chop. I mean, we may have felled a tree. We have need to pull out the chainsaw and work on it, and maybe not here. Bring it back.
I mean, I think we have a really good start here, though. I mean, I think that we're down to, we know it's the second one of 8 that we want to work with. It's just a matter of culling it down to what is this going to look like, and how do we get it to something that is measurable and meaningful.
So with that in mind, I guess we could move to we could just move proposal on the second version of 8 and then revisit it at the next meeting, or talk, and we could potentially even.
Are we talking 20 versus 28?
Yeah, I don't think that would be a substantial enough change that'd be okay.
Well, you're talking about what you're giving somebody, and if you're giving them 28 and then you're taking it down to 20, right? You're making it more harder for them to meet that standard, right? So you're giving them less credit. Like if you propose it with 28.
So propose it with 20 today if we want to revisit it later on.
To give them greater credit, then yeah, that would probably be the way to do it. Let me for a little bit of pointer context in this. So this rule was proposed August 5th in the register without the 7 out of the 8 that we're talking about here. The change. So it's currently already in the register. What we can do is at the next BHEC meeting is pull it, withdraw it, and then repropose it, or it can stay out there and then we can come back and add these changes. So most of the other, that's why everything here is highlighted and it's called a new rule, because it's not actually adopted yet. But probably what we would need to do is, if you want to add the 8 here, the second 8, withdraw and then probably do the lesser than, because you're going to make it harder for people to comply with the standard. I think if you take away the credits that you're giving, I guess. If you're giving greater credits, then it's easier to comply with. Just to back up, though, Daryl did remind me of something about the edit that you had, Dr. Becker, about wanting to add the part about supervision by tele or in person. There's a reason why he was strongly against adding that, is because it's already in the supervision rule, and he doesn't want to make duplicate parts in rules. It already would be allowed under the rules. He just doesn't want to have it redundant. And the reason why it's in the 7 is because he wanted to define what direct contact was, so that somebody wasn't clear that if tele didn't, count as direct contact. So he would strongly urge not doing that, because it would just cause issues with the actual supervision rule or whatever. So
No worries. I was just trying to make it more
clear, yeah.
more clear for people reading it when they go to read it.
Yeah.
And not have people calling Diane going, well, I'm doing telehealth supervision. Does this
that
count?
count?
So I was just looking up the website for the HRSA, and Texas contains about 25 counties that would qualify. Just for reference point.
So then, is our plan, if I understand it, to adopt the rest of the rule, pull out number 8, and propose the rule as it is so that it can get ratified through BHEC with all of the new adoptions, and then come back to this and
So-
add it as an amendment?
So if you want to move forward with the 8 today, what we can do is propose it with the change, with everything. So delete the 2 7s and the first 8, and then what we would do is repropose it with that 8 added, and the other like typographical things I think I pointed out. And then, because if we don't do anything today, it's still open for public comment and it's still moving forward. So, but we can withdraw it and repropose it, I guess, is what I'm saying. So, but if you don't do that, obviously it's going to have to wait until it gets either adopted at a later date, or you'd have to then withdraw it again and repropose it, which pushes out the adoption of this rule even
Okay.
further out, if that makes sense.
So we need to do something with it, and I think our biggest challenge is that we're not all on the same page about the maximum number of hours.
The hours can always be increased later if they're not sufficient, but not to start with so much that makes it attractive to people to abuse it.
And Dr. Becker, I like what you said. Really what it is as an incentive is that somebody would be committed to getting on their computer for an hour or what have you, and being willing to supervise somebody in a rural location, a trainee. I think that a lot of people would be willing at least to consider it.
All right, so we need, either we can leave it or we can move on it. All right, we've been.
So do we need to make all of the language changes?
So what, are you looking to possibly add 8? Okay.
I
What
think we want to add 8 and put it out for public comment, and then see what the public comes back and says.
Okay.
Because I think that may give us the best information. So I think probably what we want to do is move to modify by taking out both 7s, the first 8, and then to the second 8, we're going to modify the number of hours. It sounds like folks want to go with 20, and then specify that we need the 6 ethics and the 6 diversity to be part of that.
Right, okay.
And then let's see what the public comment is that comes back on it.
As well as add in-person or, make it more specific, can be detailed in-person or telehealth.
Well, did you hear, that's what Daryl was saying. That's what Daryl was saying. It's redundant to the rule.
Okay,
And to not put that in there.
okay.
So
I
let's-
missed that part.
Let's get clear on if there's a motion being made. Let's get clear on what the motion is. It's okay.
The motion is to remove both 7s, the first 8, and then amend the back part of 8 to 20 hours with specification that 6 hours must be diversity and 6 hours must be ethics.
I
Sure.
second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. Thank you guys for that good discussion. All right, we've been going for 2 hours. How about a 10-minute recess? And we'll be back at 10 after the hour. Y'all will turn your mics on. All right, the time is 12:15 on August 18th. The Texas State Board of Examiners of Psychologists is back. We're going to continue on the agenda. We are now on 7A5, discussion on task petition for rulemaking on Rule 46538D, Psychological Services for Schools, concerning the use of title for licensed specialist school psychology. Do we want to hear from them, or do we have anything?
It wasn't, my understanding is it wasn't an official rulemaking petition. It was just a written comment and with some proposed changes. That was what, and maybe I misunderstood, but that was what Daryl was telling me.
Okay.
It wasn't enough. It was just something that they wanted to consider. But we did get several comments, though. There were, and I guess like some position statements on it. But it is something for you guys to look at and debate. I wanted just to real quickly circle back. I talked to Daryl in the break, and he did say that we will be able to know who's claiming that. There is a way that like they can run a report and know who has claimed the 20 hours, providing supervision in rural services. So there is a way to do that.
Okay, good.
So just to let you know. But sorry, to go back to the other thing.
That's
if you want to hear from the people, though, you can ask them to come talk on it, though.
Yeah, unless the board has anything they'd like to say to start the conversation, I would like to hear from them. Hello again.
Hello again. I'm back. So this time I'm coming before you as TASP. TASP.
And state your name.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm Ashley Arnold. I'm
You
an
know that.
Lssp, NCSP, and I am representing the Texas Association of School Psychologists on this matter.
Thank you.
So TASP comes before TSBP yet again to advocate for our title change. We have literally lost count how many times we have stood in this very building stating why this change is needed, as well in the hobby building. You have in your agenda packet our letter and supporting documentation from the National Association of School Psychologists supporting the necessary use of the title of school psychologist. Therefore, in the interest of time, I won't repeat information that you already have in front of you. This is my 20th year as an LSSP, and each year feels like the movie Groundhog Day, and working with families, school staff, and community members trying to explain what an LSSP is and does. Every year, I have principals say to me, "My LSSP can do that?" Every year, I have sat in meetings with central administration staff lamenting the supposed lack of school-based mental health professionals in their district or on their campus, and the conversations fail to mention the very LSSPs that are employed in their own district. I have presented to special education directors across the state about the comprehensive role that LSSPs can provide, and their response is always, "My LSSP can do that?" Each time this happens is like a slap in the face to the almost 4,000 LSSPs in the state that provide necessary mental health services to the children and youth of our state. The final point I will bring up is just last night I was forwarded a news article from CBS News with the headline, "Half of all Texas school districts have no mental health services. Uvalde was one of them." When you read the article after this sensational and misleading headline, the article states that using data from the Texas Education Agency, that the Uvalde Consolidated Independent School District had no school psychologist on staff. This is wrong. There are 2 LSSPs employed in that district, but of course, we're not classified to TEA as school psychologists, but as LSSPs. So CBS News didn't know to ask how many LSSPs are employed in that district. Given the tragic event of the murder of 19 children and staff, this false news article is the punch in the gut to those LSSPs that were providing services in the days after that and holding the hands of those grieving family members following this tragic school shooting. How would you feel knowing that you did the best that you could in the days following one of the worst professional days of your career, only to see, as you were trying to prepare for a new school year, that you didn't exist, that the services you provided didn't happen? They are school psychologists. We are school psychologists. Say our name. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your words there. I want to come back to something you said in the beginning a couple of times. Things about saying my LSSP can do that. What are for the edification? I have some ideas of that, but I can always be better educated. And I'm sure for anybody out there in the public, like, what are those things?
So an LSSP can provide free evaluations in the public school setting, meeting TEA eligibility criteria of dyslexia, autism, specific learning disability, emotional disturbance, and other health impairment. There's roughly 9 others. We can also do counseling. We can provide behavior management techniques. We can provide consultation with families and with staff and with community members. We provide crisis intervention services. We provide professional development. We talk about learning strategies of our youth. There's a wide, comprehensive role that school psychologists provide.
So it sounds like in most of those cases, like, you can provide counseling, but you're not going to be the primary therapist.
So we provide counseling as a related service because frequently your school counselors are often tasked with doing, unfortunately, class schedules, doing the STAR testing, providing 504 accommodation and paperwork. So frequently a lot of our school counselors don't get to do counseling. And in fact, during the last legislative session, they had a bill that mandated a certain amount of their time couldn't be for paperwork. But when we really look at children that receive special education services that need counseling in order to access their education, that's when LSSPs come in and provide that service.
Well, it sounds like you're more of a stopgap. Is probably not a good way of putting it. But
Right,
you're not.
We're an additional mental health professional in the school that's not being accessed. And as we know, with 1 in 5 children and youth having a mental health disorder, most children and youth access mental health services in the school setting.
Ms. Arnold?
Yes.
Thank you so much for bringing that here. I think you made a very, very clear and passionate argument, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Being a little bit uneducated about this, can you help me understand, because I probably think that you're clearly understanding of this, what is the dissenting argument about this?
So the dissenting argument in the past has been the protection of the title of the word psychologist, that it was be confusing to the public versus psychologist versus school psychologist. And we would just like to point out that Texas and Arkansas are the only 2 states in the nation that with the same level of training, same credential, we cannot call ourselves school psychologist.
Got it?
So it's very defeating to people that move in from out of state. Like, I'm in Kansas, I'm a school psychologist, and I or I'm in Oklahoma, and I crossed the Red River, now I'm no longer a school psychologist.
Your 4 letters.
Correct, your 4 letters that nobody can remember the exact order or what they mean.
Right. Any other questions?
Ms. Arnold, I'm also very moved with your presentation.
Make sure, Dr. Singh, make sure your mic is on.
So everyone can hear you. Can you
Oh,
get closer to your mic?
well, these chairs are like for cowboys. Okay,
Is your light on?
It is.
Okay, good.
I have. If you were just dreaming, whatever you could get, and you would be given, what is your wish? What would you like? Let's say if you were dreaming, what would you like this board to do for you?
I would like for you to propose a rule today changing the title of the license LSSP to school psychologist to match 48 other states in this nation.
What do we do with the ones that have already titled as school psychologists?
Well, so you can, the issue, the name of the license is LSSP. PhD level school psychologists can call themselves school psychologists. Those of us at the specialist level, we cannot. We have to say, I'm an LSSP. And they say, what? I'm a school psychologist, but I can't really say that. Oh, okay, well now I know what you're doing. Now I know what you do. So it's changing the name of the license.
So, but we can't have 2 levels of school psychology.
You won't have 2 levels.
Yes.
You won't, because you still have PhD level LSSPs in the state. And so they then, you instead would have license of licensed psychologist, licensed psychological associate, and school psychologist.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
so what I'm seeing here is the rule change that you all submitted is specifically for those that either have their PhD or have received the certification through NCSP. So they've gotten all of those
It would be if
credentials.
you meet the requirements as currently laid out for our LSSP license. We're just changing the name of the license.
Got it. Okay.
And I thought I was proposing a rule, so I apologize for not following the correct rulemaking process today.
Quite all right.
Speak to
The
her about
only,
that.
the only thing that I can think of that I think might be an issue is that, like you said, it's just changing the license. So in Texas, it would be a PhD level sort of psychology.
No, it'd still be those of us with a specialist level. And I do want to differentiate masters because for the LSSP license, you have to have a minimum of 60 graduate hours, which now is before my time, I have a master's degree. But since that time when I graduated, the Texas Higher Ed Coordinating Board created the specialist degree. So it goes master's, specialist, PhD. Most of our programs in the state of Texas for school psychology programs are trained at the specialist level.
I see. Okay, so you wouldn't, I mean, if we change the name, you would still, the qualifications would be the same.
Correct. We are not lowering the standards. This doesn't create an undue hardship on anybody. We are literally just changing the name of the license.
I see. Thank you.
Out of curiosity, and this is more just, I guess, point of information, would this be something that we would change it in our rules, or change it in our stuff, but then would we also have to engage like TEA or the ledge for this?
I don't think so.
Because they follow
This is-
you, and
this is-
and as you see in the letter I submitted, there's actually parts in the Texas Education Code that actually already say school psychologist.
Right.
Okay.
You say something?
Yeah, I didn't want to finish, wanted to wait till the conversation was done before I spoke. In the rule packet, I don't know if, I apologize, I printed out Ms. Arnold's and Task's letters, but I forgot to put the actual rule text that I had drafted in the printed out packet. It's in the board packet in the electronic version, so I can read what it says. But they had some proposed changes here, but I wanted to talk about just briefly. Some of the issues with this is if you look at the occupations code in 501, I think it's 501-260, it's the Lssp statute. It specifically states that the council will issue a license as a specialist in school psychology, basically with the term LSSP. But what it also says is that this license qualifies for what's required under Education Code, and I think it's like 21003. And if you look at Education Code, the Education Code, it says school psychologist. So the title is in the Education Code, the LSSP title is in the Occupations Code. And so what Daryl and I looked at and what we proposed is there's specific language I could read to you, but I would say that it would need to be changed a little bit differently. It would still need to have the LSSP license, the LSSP title, but if we wanted to do it, it would basically say that you could also use the term school psychologist, but as referenced in the Education Code. But what I would strongly recommend is we could propose it, and then either before proposing it, after proposing it, at any point, also submit a request to the Attorney General's office for an opinion on it, because it's as LSSPs always are, they're a unique, they're a unique license in that you have Education Code, you have Occupations Code, and so I think there is a good argument for why you could potentially call it that, but there's also the Occupations Code that has another name for it. So it's a little bit, that's where the difficulty is, and so I think it would be the safest course is to ask the AG and say, did we overstep our bounds in doing this?
The point is that the law, the statute passed by the legislature refers to it as two different things. And we're essentially here in a position of we would like to call it the other one.
So, yeah, and if a tiny bit of background that may be, I haven't done the complete research, but my general understanding is this was back when it was in the Education Code because
Correct.
TEA was originally doing this.
Correct.
And they were using different titles, and then they kept that, but then they created the Occupations Code and moved things over
Correct.
to the Psychology Board. And so then you had these two things
After Senate
that,
Bill 1 in 1995.
Yeah.
So when we were certified under TEA, our title was Associate School Psychologist. TEA got out of the credentialing business, and so Senate Bill 1 in 1995 sent us, speech language pathologists, OTs, and PTs from TEA, where you got a certificate, to your respective licensing board. And so TEA, he's right, the Texas Education Code remained the same, because that's what we were called, but then the Occupations Code was created in 95, calling the license LSSP.
So-
So it's not just a simple issue that we could just go ahead and fix it today. It will take some time, and that means there's going to be more agencies involved, right?
Well, if I understand Patrick correctly, you could propose the rule and at the same time ask for an AG opinion that we've made this rule, are we okay in making that rule?
Essentially, and asking for an AG opinion, like it's an AG opinion is
Yes.
number one, not binding. Number two, I mean, it gives we're going to be if we're taking action on this contemporaneously with asking for an AG opinion, surely they're going to be aware we're going through rulemaking on this, so they can cry foul and say no if they feel that way. But we're not making it up out of thin air. It's already in the statute. If it was not in the statute somewhere, I think we would be in maybe getting out over our skis a little bit. But it's in the statute already.
Well, and so that was the point I was going to make a few minutes ago. Based on what we were talking about, it sounds like a large portion of the framework is already in place for it. I mean, it's just pulling a few levers.
Yeah, I would say there's what is there, 4 options. One is do nothing. One is propose the change, and when you propose the change, either ask for the AG opinion or ask for the AG opinion before it, or go ahead and make the change, and after the change is done, ask for the AG opinion. I would definitely ask for the AG opinion, and it doesn't hurt to go ahead and just, if you want to propose it and also ask for it. The issue will be is I don't know when we'll get an answer from the AG, but at least we've submitted the request to the AG, and depending on how it comes back, we'll then know. If I can just read you real quickly what I would recommend making the change to, it's subsection D of 465.38, and it would say, the correct title for an individual holding a specialist in school psychology license is licensed specialist in school psychology, striking through the or and then putting a parenthetical around the LSSP, comma, or the individual may use the title school psychologist or licensed school psychologist as referenced in section 21.003 of the Education Code, period. And then the remainder of it would continue that way.
We're not even changing anything. We're just simply pointing to, like, you can use the other title.
That's in the Education Code.
Yeah.
Are we soliciting motions?
And if there's, I don't want to short
Yeah,
the
yeah.
discussion, but if the floor is open.
I feel like this seems really reasonable, and we go to the public comment, which if this continues to be a contentious issue, I am certain that we will hear about it. But it almost feels like we've passed this as a challenge, I hope. If we are 48 states in the country that have moved past this issue, it feels like Texas should do the same. And maybe I'm just naive in that thinking.
I don't think you're naive. I think you're.
No,
So-
that was the hang up for me, is that we're one of 2 states that doesn't. I mean, clearly it's not, breaking the earth or anything in other areas. So, I don't know.
Floor's
It just
open.
seems very reasonable to me.
I move to adopt the language that
I second
Patrick
that.
has proposed here.
Yeah.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Arnold.
Congratulations.
Yeah, we gotta get it through the process first.
What about the request for Attorney
Do
General?
it, yeah. We could either do
How
that
do we
now or-
do that,
We could either do
Patrick?
that now. or
Ask
later.
for it, do a vote and a motion, and then what we'll do is probably have to send it to the council, and then the council will send it. But I can't imagine that they would not not follow that recommendation, I think,
So we have to move to request
An AG
an AG opinion on this,
on the proposed change.
on the proposed change
Second.
to the school psychologist
Moved
language.
in second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Thank you.
On behalf of the 4,000 LSSPs, thank you very much.
Maybe school psychologists soon. Okay. Moving. Hang on. Get some of these windows out of here. Rules published in the Texas Register. Sorry, hang on. We don't have any. Thank you. All right, so we on to section workplace violence for healthcare workers. I have some ideas on this. Does anybody else? Did somebody else request this, or was this the one that I wanted to talk about? I think this is the one I wanted to talk about. So I lurk in social media and mental health stuff, and I've seen stuff there where you have people who are especially it's come up via telehealth a little bit more, where people are abusive or do things of a nature that is not appropriate at all. And there was a lot of discussion, a lot of ambiguity of when is the correct time for a practitioner to punt that patient for that behavior. I think from the board's perspective, from my perspective, personal protection of a practitioner for their safety, security, well-being is huge. And they don't need to be putting themselves in situations that are detrimental to themselves, to their personal safety. And I'm not sure if anyone else is seeing this. I do know historically we've seen these things come through in ISC complaints, where we'll have people filing complaints on practitioners for abandonment or something or another, and you get into situations where it gets to stalking, you get sexual overtones in some of these advances and threats and whatnot. I think that the overarching thing that I'm seeing and hearing from practitioners is the idea of, when can I punt this person? And am I going to get roped in for abandonment? And I don't know if we need to do anything, if any communication or safe harbor sort of statement needs to be made, but I'm curious, y'all are PhDs and practitioners, what do you guys see? Is this actually a problem? Because I don't want to make it a problem if it's not. What do y'all think?
I think it's probably a problem. I think I don't know how you legislate it without opening a door.
And I agree with the idea of it doesn't rise to rulemaking.
Yeah.
It might be something of some sort of safe harbor statement or something that we're aware of this. And
Yeah, I like it more of an idea around like what we've done with our guidelines on telehealth, which I wonder if we need to draft some kind of statement around, a guideline on, I don't know if workplace violence is a correct term, but simply, putting it out there that an acknowledgement of there's a difference between abandoning your patient and stepping out of an abusive relationship. And we'd have to work with the right work group to come up with the language, but I wonder if just putting some level of statement out there, letting folks know that if you have, with appropriate documentation, and I don't even know how we would put this, but basically saying, as a practitioner, you have the right, and I would try and use positive language, that you have the right to a safe workplace environment, and when or if you feel that you are being stalked, sexually aggressed against, harassed, or otherwise endangered by your patient, that you should not feel that you have to remain in an unhealthy therapeutic relationship that endangers your health, safety, and practice. That is not patient abandonment. That is personal wellness and safety. And those are two different things.
I think I'm going to mark this, what you just said, in my mind to come back to the recording of this, and I feel like that's the outline for exactly what I feel like our statement should say.
But I think it's different. I just don't think I don't think that we could legislate that, because I think when we get into rulemaking, there are going to be unconscionable people who will then use that to abandon patients that they don't want to see.
Exactly. And to be clear, like, I don't think rulemaking is the correct avenue for this at all. It has to be more of a statement that you don't have to worry about the board coming and dropping the hammer on you. If somebody claims this, like, we're real people too, and that we've seen this as an issue, and we're going to look at it in a very clear-eyed way. Put it that way. Okay, I don't have a whole lot else.
No, I was just going to say, in organizations, there may be a human resource policy that will cover that as well. But
really
for
good idea.
private practitioners,
Cool.
I think we're going to need something.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Dr. Becker. Moving on to discussion on EPPP passage rates for Texas academic programs and doctoral reports. I've looked at this. Did somebody want to lead that discussion? Our Texas schools seem to be doing pretty good, generally speaking.
I think
Dr. Calhoun, this was brought on the agenda
Yes.
by your
Okay,
request.
so
yeah.
going back to, I guess it's best that we go back to the issue. About maybe 3 months ago, or 3 meetings ago, we talked about persons sitting for the EPPP, sometimes as many as 7 or 8 times.
Your microphone. Is your microphone?
I'm sorry. Okay, start again. Going back to the issue, about 3 meetings ago, there was some discussion on the number of times candidates came in and sat for the EPPP. Sometimes as many as 7 times, 8 times, and of course they came in with a remedial plan, and in most instances, the committee approves it. And I suggested that we go to the Texas Commission on Higher Education to see if we could have a look at their peer reviews for psychology programs. I thought that we would find that this information existed because I came from South Carolina, and we did that with the Commission on Higher Education. Found out that Texas does not do that. Once the program is approved, and when the person sits for the EPPP, they follow the first attempt to pass, and they're not following all of those additional attempts to sit for the EPP. So I thought that perhaps we could look at that, and maybe rather than having persons over a period of years come back and apply again and again and fail again and again, that maybe we could find some other pathways to get them into practice. I don't know what those pathways would be. I'm not a psychologist, but I was hoping that maybe you might have some ideas on how we could get, because we know that we need psychologists at all levels. So I thought perhaps we could discuss this and perhaps come up with some ideas on how we could get these people actually practicing, not necessarily as a licensed psychologist, but maybe even recommending that they undergo supervision and that they work with someone else, maybe for a year or 2, and then come back. And I have some other thoughts about that, but I just wondered if any of the psychologists had any ideas about how we might address that and maybe get more persons into the profession.
I have some thoughts. I think that, I'm not familiar with the numbers exactly how many times people are attempting to pass this exam. But I think it's fair to, perhaps, once somebody fails to pass it for the 5th time or what have you, I don't think we need to get stuck on which time, but X time that we can look at, say, for example, there are a couple of universities here where their pass rates are in the 60s. And we can look at the content area specifically where they're losing the most number of points. And maybe at that point, make a recommendation or stipulation that they retake that particular, where they're losing the most number of points. So I see one here where treatment and interventions would be a place where 30 points could be recouped, or percentage points. There's another one here, where it's just a biological basis of behavior. I don't know that you can remediate that with supervision. That's just content for the profession. I don't know. I think that's fairly straightforward. I don't know what your thoughts are.
So for me, this is an educational gap and not necessarily a licensing gap. Mm-hmm. So I think there are 2 things to think about. One is that the EPPP, depending how your graduate program is structured, this is also a little bit controversial right now because you also have the split of now there's going to be potentially a step 1 and a step 2 to the EPPP, which could cause all kinds of reorganization of how the EPPP is administered and standardized and things like that. Mm-hmm. So this version of the EPPP, if there is a step 2 that is ratified and adopted broadly, could potentially move further into the pre-doctoral training and more integrated into the pre-doctoral work, which would change things up a little bit. But right now, the EPPP for most graduate students occurs after they are done their PhD. Mm-hmm. There are some programs that integrate it and require it as part of the program, and they have to take it as a graduate requirement. Yeah. Right, and they use it. It is part of the moving forward to get your PhD, and they use it in lieu of a clinical exam. Okay, and so some of those pass rates are what they are because it is part of the doctoral degree to do the EPPP. Okay, which is why some PLPs are LPAs as well. Okay, they register as an LPA, they take it and move on. So there are other licensures that folks can achieve without passing at a doctoral level. So there's that piece of things. But to your point, what else can you do? I think that, if you want to think outside the box, I think there are ways for us to think about, as a state, do we want to provide and again, I'm not sure that this is the purview of a licensing board to think about support for the EPPP. That is it is a nationwide exam. Yes. It's like offering support for the bar, as a lawyer. So I don't know how we support that in a meaningful way. It's really incumbent upon students to think about, prep classes for that are very expensive. So do we think about, subsidies or pathways to helping folks remediate? I don't know that that's within the purview of what we do. So that's where it starts to get a little bit messy for me. I think might be more bang for our buck for looking at things with the jurisprudence exam than the EPPP, because the EPPP to me feels a little bit more like it belongs to the graduate schools and the graduate schools prepping and owning what they are preparing students for.
I agree with you, because we have 100% pass rate at the master's level for LPC and LPA. Starting today, we are beginning PsyD program in counseling psychology. And I was director of that program for 30 years, and then now I'm not, but it's based on all that. So how we set it up, we teach our students all that stuff that's on, Triple P. We teach in the courses. We have not only one course for this, we have several courses where we cover it. And we continually tell them, like I'm teaching one of the courses, the multicultural counseling psychology. We continually tell them, this will be on your licensure exam.
Yes.
And we say, if you do well on this course, if you learn this material, you would have no problem passing. And so I agree with, it's not our job as a regulating board to be worrying about it. It should be something board can send to academic programs, that these are some areas that we're testing you on, and you better make sure your students are competent to pass on those.
May I say something? Partly why this is brought to us is because the board reviews EPPP study plans for people that fail the test 3 or more times. So that's kind of how all this came about, of reviewing how the performance of the academic programs are doing. So that's so we kind of have some hand-holding in some of it to evaluate person's study plans that are coming before us.
I wonder if this is something, and of course Carol just left, but I do wonder if this is something that TPA might be interested in partnering with us on. Or, I know we're not supposed to do that, right?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I'd be careful with it.
Yeah, that language.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just don't know how we do
We can
anything with
specify
that.
more details about the exam and send it to the different programs and say, this is what your students need to be mastering it. That's one way to, once we know what you expect, like academicians know what you expect from our students, we start gearing our courses toward teaching that stuff.
Yeah, we were hoping, or initially, I was hoping that there would be some review, some peer review being done in the institutions with recommendations for improvement, strengths, weaknesses. I know, like I'm a community member. But I don't understand how, we have people coming 7 and 8 and 9 times with an appeal plan to remediate, and it's so I don't know, perhaps I was thinking we should suggest that after they get to a certain limit, that we suggest that they maybe do something else and come back, perhaps in 2 years. But I don't know, it's just thought, because remediation isn't working.
This is happening at all levels. I know some medical doctors who haven't passed, foreign medical doctors who are all done everything they can pass their exams to practice. And there are psychologists I know who are working under LPC license because they got grandfather on that one, but they couldn't pass their licensed psychologist exam, and they took several times. So sometimes I think people develop this mental set of failing. They just have this block. They're not going to pass those exams. Those are few such people, but most of the time it's the programs have not trained them. There are many programs, they become so lofty and they leave so much on the student at the doctoral level that the professors don't have the time to teach all that stuff. It is almost like teaching undergraduate class to make people learn that those stuff that's on the exam. Because I have submitted this when I was on working as a examiner for the oral exam. We used to be asked a long time ago to submit ethics questions, and I have submitted ethics questions several times. And what I did, I took it from my textbooks and got it from them. And you cannot pass those items unless you've read the textbooks, unless somebody has taught you that. So there is a lot of that stuff that's there's a gap in who's all these exams, between the exams and the way teachers are preparing the students.
So it seems, Dr. Singh, that you're saying it's a remediation of content that needs to happen. And I wonder if it would be helpful for us, not partnering with anybody, but maybe making available the areas of the exam and the performance on the last testing that took place, or maybe even annually if we didn't even want to do that. But making information available so that people could see in the different programs how their students are faring.
That information is publicly available. That graph that you're looking at of program performance is publicly available.
I think the problem is that, I think you need motivation to be able to search for that information and look it up.
It's online.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Could we then just kind of maybe as a way to kind of give information, even though it is online and readily available, obviously it's not being used and acted upon, but to be able to maybe send it to whoever is in charge of.
Send it to the department chair and then it gets done. Send it to the department chair and request that please
Disseminate.
This is for your students, future exams. Give it to the program director. And that's what
we look it up every year.
I think there have been times when we have received from LPC board, we have received specific areas and what needs to be done and all that. And our department chair got it and he gave it to me, and then I implemented it.
You see, because individually, if there is an applicant that's failing multiple times and they're studying and the board is reviewing a study plan with them, that isn't going to fix a lack of content. And so this really gets at the lack of content that we're seeing here that isn't there for the applicant. And while it is readily available, that applicant is doing everything and they're drowning. And I think that could be a way to assist them to get whatever program that they graduated from, maybe not to help them personally, even though that would be wonderful, but to help the students that are coming up and will be presenting themselves as to take that exam.
Yeah, I think that would be addressed if there was some sort of peer review for the psychology programs, but there's none. So.
I wonder if, from a licensing board perspective, Diane, do we have data? I know, your favorite word. How many of these individuals do we have that are sort of in the queue?
We really are not tracking them, but just in the last week, I think we've had 2
Okay.
So
And so we know which programs these are from.
we would have to check through their applications. But the portion that comes to us, that's not in there. It doesn't, the questionnaire doesn't ask them to list their academic program. It just provides their background, if they've had any special accommodations. And then there are suggestions in the form itself, like
Okay.
to go back to your academic program.
Right.
But they have to construct a plan because it is a BHEC rule that is requiring this process. But the information we get does not include.
Okay, so
That history.
this is information that's coming from ASPPB and not from the licensee,
Applicant?
from the applicant.
Right, I don't think, no, we're getting a study plan from the applicant, and they provide us with their score history.
Right. So if they're an applicant, we would have their program on their application. They would
The
have to
remedial
give us
plan.
that.
Yeah.
Well, because I guess what I'm getting at is that, I just want to. We're a licensing board. We're not an educational board, and so they are submitting to us what they're doing. I think when we get in the business of telling them what to do, that's going to be really problematic. I think where our bang for our buck is in tracking and potentially going back to the program that seeded the challenge if we see a pattern. Because the other thing that we have to acknowledge is we're making the assumption that these applicants are coming from the state of Texas. You don't have to go to graduate school in the state of Texas to apply for licensure in the state of Texas. I didn't go to school in Texas. So we are sort of taking this very heavy-handed assumption that we are going to go back and tell a university that is in the state of Texas that they need to do a better job training their students. What happens when that student trained in Colorado or California or North Carolina? They're going to listen to the State Board of Texas and go, okay, thanks for the
Texas
call.
won't be doing a peer review.
So I mean, I just want to be mindful of what we're saying we're going to do here. Okay?
Yeah.
I think that it's an important distinction and reminder to know what is our lane as a regulatory board. And there are lots of things that could be better, but just making sure that we stay within our statutory and regulatory purview. And I'm not sure what the action that we would take on this that would be impactful and also lie within those boundaries.
Perhaps we could have a discussion with the Commission on Higher Education.
Yeah.
And ask them what do they think about peer reviews.
Yeah, I mean,
Not for
I
all the
think
programs.
that's what I'm saying is I think for the programs that are falling within Texas, I think we can flag those programs and go back to those programs and say, hey, have you noticed this pattern? Maybe you need to do some peer reviews, and we can call them out as a courtesy. But I don't know that as a general process or rule that this is something we need to be in the business of doing. I think where we have ownership is in the jurisprudence exam and some of the problems that we brought up in the jurisprudence exam, because that's our process and that's where we have some work to do. This work actually belongs somewhere else is where I think we're struggling.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you very much. We're getting close. Discussion on TSBB insights over lunch, potential dates and topics. Patrick, I imagine Daryl would have had this if he was here. Do you have something on this?
I don't. I don't think there's anything in the board materials either.
Right, so actually at the
you? Sorry,
last,
Diane.
at the special meeting that we had, Dr. Cartwright had brought this up.
Okay.
So we do the insights over lunch for BHEC as a whole, but some of the other member boards have done independent insights over lunch. They pick a topic and then, have an open dialogue with the public. So this is something that he thought we should be doing, and wanted to know if you guys wanted to put something on the books.
Let's probably, I'll reach out to Dr. Cartwright, and we'll probably put this on the agenda for next meeting
Okay.
and do a holdover on that.
No problem.
Any recommendations for agenda items for the next board meeting before we wrap up? Hearing none. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn. Without objection. Hearing none. See y'all next time. Thank you.